Hello, I'm Ellen Bintz, coming today from Wheaton, Illinois, in the USA. Welcome to Impact, a podcast about how we can each bring about real change in the world and getting practical in making that happen.
And hello, I'm Clive Johnson, coming today from Leigh-on-Sea in the UK. A special welcome if you're listening for the first time, and a big thank you to our new subscribers. Each week, we look at one aspect of how we can connect our hearts to offer healing for others with our collective intention, prayers, and meditation, and go behind the headlines of a critical happening in our world that needs our attention right now.
In today's episode, we take one of these regular deep dives to more fully understand and tune in with something many of us may know only a little about and see where we might hone in with our prayers and intentions. And as we record, it's December 4th, 2024.
This week, we turn our attention to a country that will elect its next president on the 8th of December, so within days of our recording, and which experienced a shock in its first round of voting, as a little-known far-right candidate came from almost nowhere to knock out the incumbent prime minister from the presidential runoff. We are talking about the forthcoming election in Romania. The election is the first seen in Europe since the US presidential election last month, and some analysts have suggested that Donald Trump's populist and nationalistic messaging, together with the failure of opinion polls prior to the US presidential election to predict his win, may be being replicated in Romania. What happens in Romania may have implications for other countries too, especially in Europe, as we'll see.
So what happened in the first round of Romania's presidential election? Well, the first round was on November 24th, and it saw the far-right independent candidate, Călin Georgescu, unexpectedly winning the first round with just under 23% of the vote. Centrist candidate Elena Lasconi of the Save Romania Union came in second with just over 19% of the vote, while incumbent Prime Minister Marcel Ciolacu of the Social Democratic Party, who was initially favored to win, came in third. This result was unexpected for several reasons. Georgescu was polling at less than 10% before the election. He primarily campaigned on TikTok and had no official party affiliation. And his victory marks the first time in Romania's post-communist history that the leftist PSD party has not had a candidate in the second round. Georgescu's popularity exploded just ahead of the vote, especially through his posts on TikTok presenting him as being relatable to ordinary people, attending church, running, and the like. His campaign has focused on making Romania more self-reliant, which appears to have resonated strongly with voters.
Maybe you can go on TikTok, Helen. I was just thinking, pictures of you running.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ordinary person.
Forget Kamala next time round.
Yeah, here I come.
Here you come. However, Georgescu's success has raised concerns due to his political stance. In particular, he is critical of NATO and the EU. He has made pro-Russia statements and praised 1930s Romanian fascist politicians. His victory could potentially impact Romania's pro-Western and pro-Ukrainian position. The unexpected outcome has been controversial, causing Romania's constitutional court to order a recount of the votes following complaints filed by two candidates who lost in the first round, and amid allegations of potential Russian meddling in the election. Thousands of young Romanians protested against the result in Bucharest following the vote. However, the final votes have since confirmed the first round result, showing that Georgescu gained some 2.12 million votes, or nearly 23% of the overall vote.
So what are the key issues of concern for Romanians ahead of this vital election? Romanians are grappling with several key issues as they head into this crucial election, not least a crippling cost of living crisis, as the country is experiencing high inflation and rising prices, putting a financial strain on many households. The country has one of the highest rates of people at risk of poverty within the EU and faces high budget deficits, raising concerns about potential austerity measures. Many Romanians are tired of political corruption and have a lack of trust in state institutions. The poor state of public services is also undermining trust in the system. Many also fear the threat of conflict, particularly in relation to the war in Ukraine. Voters are concerned about the candidate's position on Ukraine, Russia, and Romania's relationship with the EU and NATO, while some are being drawn to nationalist rhetoric and calls for greater Romanian self-reliance. Ioana Papascu-Zamfir, director of the Bucharest-based think tank Global Focus Center, says that Romania is faced with two important realities next year: the threat of further instability and conflict in the region and globally, especially in the context of a Trump White House. She says also that the risks of deepening economic and financial crisis, given that Romania is currently running one of the highest twin budget deficits and inflation rates in the EU, and the cost of commodities has continued to increase while government expenditures has stayed high, largely because of the bloated state apparatus.
At the same time, the country has seen a massive brain drain in recent years. Millions of young workers have left Romania in search of higher paying jobs abroad, contributing to a demographic decline. Romania is slowly losing its highly qualified workforce, while low birth rates have led to a marked population decline. Despite this, immigration is a growing concern for some voters. Romania also plays host to around 140,000 refugees from Ukraine, its northern neighbor, although happily, most Romanians remain generally welcoming toward them. So taken together, these issues have contributed to a sense of dissatisfaction with the status quo. And this is what potentially has fueled support for anti-establishment and a far-right candidate in the election.
Two candidates standing for the Romanian presidential election, and what policies are they advocating? As we've said, the two candidates advancing to the second round are the independent far-right candidate, Călin Georgescu, and the center-right Save Romania Union Party candidate, Elena Lasconi. The difference between the key policy positions that they are offering are stark. Georgescu has been critical of NATO and the EU, advocates for Romania's neutrality and closer ties with Russia, promises generous spending and no tax hikes, emphasizes Romanian sovereignty and national identity, and calls for an end to the war in Ukraine. By contrast, Lasconi is strongly supportive of the EU and NATO, advocates for increased defense spending and giving continued aid to Ukraine, is running on an anti-corruption reformist agenda ticket, and supports a stronger NATO presence in Romania. The results of the election, therefore, has significant implications for Romania's foreign policy, particularly regarding its stance on Ukraine and relations with the EU and NATO. Georgescu's unexpected success has raised concerns among Romania's Western allies about a potential shift in Romania's pro-Western orientation. For his part, Georgescu denies criticisms lobbied against him that he is an extremist, saying, "We remain directly linked to European values, but we must find our own values," also saying that he is not a fascist.
So why might the Romanian election have wider implications beyond the country's borders? Beyond Călin Georgescu's NATO and EU skepticism, potentially these two altering Romania's pro-Western stance, the Romanian presidential election this year has other significant implications beyond the country's borders. If Georgescu is elected, Romania's role as a key NATO ally on the eastern flank and its support for Ukraine may be impacted. Its position on Ukraine and its relationship with Russia could affect regional stability, influencing the balance of power in Eastern Europe. So this is incredibly significant, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
If Georgescu is elected, Romania will become more aligned with the Moscow sympathetic and anti-immigration Viktor Orban, prime minister of its neighbor, Hungary, another major country, of course, in that part of the world in Eastern Europe. Political instability or economic downturn in Romania could also lead to an increased migration within the EU, in turn affecting other member states. But perhaps most critically, Georgescu's success points to the continuing rise of far-right sentiment across Europe, which could embolden similar movements across the continent, especially given the significant role of platforms like TikTok to shape political discourse and enable popularist leaders to come to the fore. Actually, I was hearing a report on the radio here in the UK this morning that suggests that the Labour government in the UK is actually going back to using TikTok because it sees that the far right are actually really doing very well with it. It had actually been banned within government, TikTok as a platform for marketing, I think partly through fears of its ownership under Chinese ownership, and therefore this would be a potential security risk if government servers and so on are being used, I guess. But no, they've decided to go back. TikTok and social media in general is so important in political campaigning.
Oh my gosh. Well, especially for the younger generations,
absolutely.
They definitely.
Yeah.
I definitely like that. Ah. Well, in recent years, the Netherlands, France, and Austria have witnessed a similar trend, although this has to date largely not resulted in a radical shift in the political leadership of these countries. On the near horizon, and perhaps more significantly, Germany goes to the polls in February next year, following the collapse of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's three-party coalition government. While recent polls suggest the center-right CDU-CSU alliance is currently leading with 32% support, the far-right Alternative for Germany party, which is the AfD, is polling close to 20%, bolstered by fears about immigration among many Germans. The rise of a far-right party in Germany to such a level of support has not been seen since the Second World War, although other parties have pledged that they will not support it in any coalition. In Eastern Germany, the AfD has garnered up to 36% support among voters under 30. And in some polls, its popularity has surpassed that of Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democratic Party, indicating a significant shift in the political landscape in Germany. We will, of course, be watching this very closely.
Yeah. This is going to be one critical election next year.
Yes.
And to see this happening in Germany is extraordinary, actually, this shift. And again, particularly amongst the younger population. I found that sobering, that fact. The far right in Germany today has not seen such a level of support since the time of the Nazis.
Well, could it be because the younger generation doesn't remember World War II and, they don't have those memories.
It could well be. Yeah. Yeah. We're now, several generations on, aren't we? I guess certainly second generation, possibly third generation, will have heard many stories from their parents. It was such an important part of the psyche of post-war Germany to build unity and to not go back in that direction. But yes, that seems to have broken down. I find that very sobering, very sobering.
My friends in Germany, and I do business in Germany, it seems to be the immigration issue they're really struggling with.
Yeah.
That's polarizing people.
Yes. And there've even been some new controls on borders, or monitoring at least, I would say, which is, again, unheard of in the time of the EU. There have been open borders, but no, it has become a concern. So where might we hone in with our intentions and prayers? In the critical days ahead for Romania, we suggest focusing our intentions and prayers for all voters to have wisdom in the course the country should take in its relationships with the EU, NATO, and Russia.
We will that all will be moved to appreciate both the short and the long-term consequences of their vote, not to be driven by knee-jerk reactions and soundbite social media messaging. but to think through the issues and inquire into what is really an offer and what the implications may be for their country.
And we might ask for respectful and peaceful debate between the candidates and for balanced and accurate media reporting of the candidates' positions, including journalists soundly scrutinizing and reality checking their claims.
Whoever is elected, we might will for wisdom for the incoming president and their government to work to address the pressing challenges that the country's facing.
And whoever is elected, we might will for a continued welcome for the thousands of Ukrainian refugees who now depend on Romania's hospitality.
So this week, as Romanians consider their own and their country's future, we suggest holding as our main intention, we will that all Romanians going to the polls on December 8th will have wisdom and be moved by compassion for their fellow citizens in deciding where to cast their vote. Please join us in holding this intention.
Absolutely. As we've been saying all this year, many critical elections happening, and they keep happening, don't they?
Yes. Yes, they do.
Certainly in the new year, Germany, my goodness, just around the corner.
We'll definitely be covering that one.
Definitely.
Stay tuned. That about wraps it up for this episode. Remember, you can connect with us in the Facebook group and for live intention holding in Clive's daily Insight Timer offerings, and with me in the Labyrinth Activist Network's Zoom calls. Details of how to hook up with these are in our show notes. Look out too for our next special topic episode, which we'll be releasing in the next few days. Thank you for listening and for sharing with us and holding intentions. We look forward to connecting again next time. And in the meantime,
thank you. Go well. Stay safe.
And remember, we're more powerful together.
Impact is presented by Ellen Bintz and Clive Johnson and produced by Impact Productions. Our theme music is by Chris Collins, and our logo artwork is by Auto Classic. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, or your favorite podcast provider. We're a non-commercial podcast dedicated to people of any faith tradition or none who yearn for healing in our troubled world. Please pass on the word so others may join us in making an impact. Thank you for listening.